I want to follow up on something we talked about yesterday. We had a very good guest on and talked a great deal, very articulate and intelligent way about the energy issue here with the biomass, specifically our friend Peter Kenny, who called from Massachusetts, who is an energy consultant. And we were discussing some of the subtle and some of the overt issues about the biomass. Yesterday afternoon, I contacted my good friend Chris Bird, who is the head of the local environmental protection department for the county, and asked him for his take on this because he had been out to visit this biomass plant on behalf of the county and the complaints about noise, and also, interestingly enough, complaints about dust that is settling in the nostrils and on the cars and the windshields of guess whom? County workers at the nearby Public Works facility in Hague, which actually is the closest building, office to the biomass plant. It's even closer than the Turkey Creek. The complaints there have been about particulate matter coming into their yard, onto their cars, everywhere they go, the clothing even. Now, so that's part of it. But we talked about what can be done about these complaints about the biomass plant. And I learned for the first time from Chris something very interesting, that there are 2 permits involved with this plant. One right now is a construction permit. That's what that plant is operating under right now. It is a temporary permit during that time. If you will, and this is an important distinction for those of you who are involved in this issue, the plant is allowed, if you will, to make mistakes, to try to correct them, to address issues that people have, everything from particulate matter to noise. So it is not the time or the permit that will allow enforcement of any violation, since there can be no violation until there is an occupational permit. And that won't happen. That permit will not occur until January. So there are 2 permits. It's the final permit that allows you to go ahead and do business. It's just like if you were building a house. You work under a construction permit until finally you get your final approval, and then you get your occupation permit, and you move into the house, and you then are subject to all the ordinances and covenants of whatever addresses that piece of property that you now have taken ownership of. So up until that time, you're under a different set of standards, and it's understood that you're still under construction and that things still can be corrected. This involves all sorts of things, as you might imagine, septic tanks and locations of power lines, all those sort of things in the housing industry. So the plant right now is operating under, if you will, a construction permit. That is it has a toleration range for mistakes, which must be corrected. Now, let's complicate this issue a little bit more. It is very difficult to address noise. I learned that would be done by the State Environmental Protection Department in Jacksonville. It would not be done by the local Environmental Protection Department, because the state is the one that the legislature has given the authority to authorize this plant. So there's going to have to be a crescendo of complaints documented and notarized, is the conjecture here, if one is to get the attention of the State Environmental Protection Department about something as perhaps as vague and ill-defined and difficult to measure as noise. And then I've been advised that you need to consider this in the context of all the issues that the State Environmental Protection Department in Jacksonville already has to deal with. It's an industrial city. There's all sorts of industrial issues there. And so how high up the ladder will a noise complaint from a biomass plant in Gainesville make it to the agency in Jacksonville that has the authority and the obligation to address it, which can't even be addressed until the occupation license has been approved, and then it can be addressed, because then it becomes a violation that can be enforced, because it is assumed that now that you got your license, you have worked out all your problems. So if that problem is still a problem, then it can be addressed. Can it be addressed by local law enforcement? Very, very difficult. We know how difficult noise is to monitor. We went through this with noise on Lake Santa Fe and airboats. And in listening to the meetings before the meetings and the discussions among the commissioners, I heard everybody talk all over the place as a commissioner about what noise was, how far away, whether the wind had anything to do with the time of day, what was a reasonable time of day to tolerate noise, what was not a reasonable time of day, what is the definition of noise. There are so many things that get involved in this. So I have to tell you, according to the information I've gotten from my friend who has looked into this very carefully, I have to applaud them for that. They have looked into this very carefully. Are right now in a wait-and-see process legally from their point of view, from an enforcement point of view. It would have to take a crescendo of complaints from citizens that would be addressed to the State Environmental Protection Department and put into the hopper as a priority among all the other things once the occupational license is given. That's my understanding of this. I stand corrected if anybody calls in and corrects me, but that's the discussion. We had a very thorough discussion with Chris yesterday for about 45 minutes. He and I maintain a rapport. I am the chair of the Rural Advisory Committee to the Alachua County Commission. We took this up yesterday in our Rural Concerns Advisory Committee, as we do as a committee, and we advise the County Commission. We do monitor the biomass. We review the issues with the biomass because these noise issues can conceivably, although this is really new territory, we don't have anything in our work plan that addresses noise particularly. We only say we will look at the biomass and anything that might become a problem we can address. But we even discussed whether a noise would conceivably affect, say, if you have a dairy nearby. And particularly if you had, and I don't think we do there in that area, I think we do have some dairies, UF dairies, but we don't have any, for example, breeding grounds for racehorses or something, where somebody could argue that that has upset the breeding habits and productivity of these very expensive horses. Oh, it's conceivable, I suppose, that if that were the case, that could be factored into the discussion. So I report that to you. I know there are a lot of you listening. I get a lot of emails. I know that a lot of you are recording the show. Check me out on that. That was my discussion. Summarize that. There are 2 permits, the one under which the plant is operating now and one in which it will ultimately have to operate. Some of the complaints can be addressed now by the plant without any punitive measures taken by those who are complaining, but that changes in January when the occupational license would be given, and the plant therefore is responsible for having worked out all of its tweaks. Now, that doesn't address some of the other issues as to whether the plant is for sale, whether or not the university would buy any of the power. I know that there is an editorial out there that is browbeating the university into saying, oh, if you were a good player, you would buy power. In other words, you would bail us out of this problem that we've created ourselves, and you would start buying this power, even though, albeit it might be more expensive. Well, clearly, the taxpayers around the state should rebel at that. Why would the taxpayers around the state who support these state universities and these students with their tuitions and their books, why would they subsidize bad judgments, poor decisions by a local government that they did not have a voice in? It doesn't make any sense. I don't see why, other than for stirring the pot, the newspaper would print an editorial like that, except that controversy sells papers, and they certainly create issues into controversies. I have to say also that I think, and I discussed this even with some other people and Chris too, I think the ultimate solution to this is going to be, if there ever is one, legislative action that takes the utility out of the hands of the Gainesville City Commission. I think it has been shown without any difficulty, and can be shown without any difficulty, that where this went, where this went off the rails is when the contracts were not done with transparency and accountability. Debate was not allowed. Honest discussion was thwarted at every turn. And a political agenda sponsored something that became financially unwise, perhaps even not feasible for the community. And now the community is stuck with it. From our discussions yesterday, we know that Austin shut its plant down. It's not inconceivable that that would happen here. So I wanted to come back with a follow-up on that story. I don't think you'll read anything in the paper or anywhere else about these two permits. That is requires a little research, a little digging, and I want to provide that sort of information to you because I do not want you to be one of the uninformed masses. So it's very easy to be one of the uninformed masses if you don't have a research team, if you don't have contacts, if you don't have rapport with people in the community who will give you adequate information that I can pass along to you. Then if you choose to do things that are ill-advised with that information, then that's your business. But right now, we don't want you to be one of the uninformed masses. It is now 7:47, and I've got to share with you a text I just got from my good friend Chris Bird, who's listening, who is head of the Environmental Protection Department here in Alachua County. And I think I got most of it right, according to Chris, with one clarification, which I immediately want to pass along to you, that noise is enforced by local law enforcement. That's GPD or ASO. And that dust and air pollution is enforced by the Florida Department of Environmental Protection in Jacksonville. So stand corrected on that. Please take a note of that. I appreciate Chris listening, and I hope that you've got that correction. It is definitely something to think about, how complicated this issue is. It's going to be with us for a while. You're going to hear a lot of discussion about it, and we need to talk as much as we can with people who are looking into it in a way that gives us fresh information that will help us make, hopefully, a wise decision, because we're pretty far down the road in this decision-making process, and I don't know whether the cumulative effect of the decisions that have made already can be altered significantly or not. That remains to be seen. We've got a caller on the line, Debbie Martinez. Are you still there, Debbie?
Yes, I sure am.
I didn't mean to say that you shouldn't, people involved in this issue shouldn't keep doing that. I hope I didn't mislead in my comments there. What I was trying to...
No, I just didn't want anyone that could possibly get confused.
Right, and what was new to me, and you may have known this before, Debbie, but I never realized it, and that was that there are two actual permits right now, one of which the facility is operating under right now, which has certain conditions that can be, operate in accordance with, and then later on another permit which will also give certain conditions it can operate in accordance with. Did you know that? I didn't know that.
Yes, starting in sometime after January, they'll get not an occupational permit. It's called the operating permit.
Operating permit, right.
Yeah, see, right now they're permitted through, I believe it's called Fagan. They're operating the plant out there. And then it'll be handed over to GREC, which sounds like the Gainesville, but they're from Massachusetts, this GREC company that owns the biomass plant. And that's when the operating permit will be issued at the first of the year to GREC.
Well, Debbie, help me understand something. I just picked up this yesterday, and you can help me understand. There was a lawsuit a while back about, was it not about noise or something that Ray Washington and maybe Tom Bussing and some people were involved in, and there was a settlement of that suit that addressed some of the issues. Do you recall that settlement and how it was?
A little bit. I know that the settlement awarded the county, Chris Bird's department, $25,000 a year to monitor the emissions, and that's only up to 5 years.
Right, and I did talk to Chris yesterday, and they will hire an outside agency to do that with that settlement money, so it won't come out of the taxpayer's pocket. And it was one of my first questions, which I was relieved to hear. And the thinking is an outside agency will monitor this a little more objectively, and perhaps you'll get a little more truth.
Exactly, and that's why it's important to establish, all of these. You have to document the fugitive dust, and it's important to send these affidavits to Jacksonville and have a good documentation.
Well, I'm glad you're up on all these nuances, and I'm sure you are, because you've been taught to do that.
Yes, yes. And the other thing, too, I'm just being a nurse, I'm all about prevention, and if we can prevent a disaster, we're miles ahead of the game. And this is just another example where GRU general manager failed to negotiate protecting the community from noise pollution, which kills just as much as air pollution. And the city commissioners didn't demand it of him.
It's a very nebulous area too, and difficult to monitor and police. And I know this from the Santa Fe airboat issue. There was a lot of discussion about that, as we talked about before. The other thing I think is really ironic here is if this particulate were coming from a limestone road put down by the county, there would be some real consternation there. Because the county would be responsible for trying to quiet that nuisance of that dust coming up all this limestone road. That's one of the issues, and Bruce, of course, the mayor of Angerville, knows about this. When these lime rock roads go unpaved and there's several different ways they can be treated, they create one of the biggest air pollution hazards in the county.
Yes.
Because of all that dust coming up off those roads when it doesn't rain. So there's a lot to be looked at here. I appreciate your vigilance on this. Appreciate you listening to the show. Hopefully it's informative and helpful. And if we don't have the information right, well, don't hesitate to call in and amend it.
Because these people, deserve to be able to sleep. It's a public health hazard that we've got with the noise coming from the Grec plant.
Now, is there not another, how shall I say this, presentation on behalf of concerned citizens to the municipal government here soon?
I'm positive you'll probably see something. They're getting organized, and it's a large community, and they're also working with their neighbors from the mobile home park across the street. So they're all working together to help each other on this. So I think we'll be hearing more from them.
Well, I'm getting a lot of emails. I've got about 6 or 7 printed out pages of emails. I've just got a couple of more that came in on my iPhone here. So people are listening, people are emailing, and they're concerned. So I'm just amazed when I think back on it, Debbie. I was stopped one time in a parking lot several years ago by, I believe it was probably Tom Bussing, maybe Harold was there, by a group asking me to sign something about the biomass plant. And I said, what the heck is this they're talking about,
Yeah, that's because we had no media coverage and there was not one public meeting to discuss the terms of this contract. So the public was in the dark. And then when the contract did come out, it was all redacted, so they had to take legal actions to unredact it. So this is why the public was kept in the dark, and now the noise, they're not in the dark anymore. They're really suffering, and my heart goes out to, this is really a severe health issue when you can't get your sleep.
Well, I appreciate you staying up on this and staying in contact and listening to the show and giving us good information that we can share with everybody. And I don't know what the outcome's going to be. We'll keep reporting it. You don't have to worry about it being under the radar here.
Well, thank you for the great work that you're doing on this. We'll stay tuned to your show to keep updated.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Have a good day.
Thank you.